Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Olajide Oluleye. I'm presenting my final research proposal for Psychology 826, Contemporary Topics in Industrial and Organizational Psychology. The title of my final research proposal is the relationship between inclusive leadership and employee work engagement, the mediating role of psychological safety. The model contains one independent variable, inclusive leadership, and one mediator, psychological safety, and one dependent variable, employee work engagement. So in a shorthand, the model is inclusive leadership to psychological safety to work engagement. So the central argument is that inclusive leader behavior may influence how safe employees feel when they speak, question, or contribute, and that may help explain their vigor, dedication, absorption to work. I will first establish the research problem, the evidence base, and then translate that argument into a three-wave design, statistical plan, timeline, limitations, and the next step. The next slide begins with a brief roadmap of this presentation. This slide presents the presentation roadmap organized into 6 sequential sections. Section 1 addresses the drafting of the research question, the process of narrowing a broad leadership topic into a focused, direct, and indirect effect mediation question. Section 2 defines the 3 key constructs: inclusive leadership, psychological safety, work engagement. Section 3 identifies the problem and gaps in the literature, establishing both scholarly and practical justification for this study. Section 4 presents the hypothesis and develops the dependent variable using the 4Ds framework, which I'm going to explain in a subsequent slide. Section 5 addresses the method and statistical plan, covering the design, sample, instrument, power analysis, and analysis strategy. Finally, Section 6 presents the timelines, limitation, and next step. This presentation represents a fully reconciled proposal. The introduction and the method section have been integrated into one continuous scholarly argument. The transition to the fourth section begin now. This slide introduces the process of research question drafting by illustrating how a broad topic is systematically narrowed into a testable mediation model. The starting point was a broad interest in inclusive leadership and employee motivation in contemporary work teams. For that broad topic, the literature directed attention to a more focused mechanism, the possibility that psychological safety may explain the link between leadership behavior and employee engagement. As Aslan et al. 2021, Sia 2023, Vakira et al. 2023 each established in their respective studies psychological safety function as the explanatory variable between inclusive leader behavior and employee investment in work. So the next slide explains why this question matters to me personally and professionally. This slide presents the personal, professional, and research value foundation that motivate this proposal. Employee experience, my personal interest comes from observing how leaders either invite or silence employee contribution. Employees experience inclusion through ordinary behaviors, whether a supervisor listen, provide access to information, respond to concerns, and treat ideas as useful. Professionally speaking, inclusive leadership is valuable to industrial and organizational psychology because it is observable and developable. It can be assessed, strengthened through leadership development, and linked to meaningful employee outcomes rather than discussed only as an abstract cultural value, according to Kochmas et al. 2022. The research value is the focus on mechanism. This proposal does not only ask whether inclusive leadership relates to engagement, it also asks whether psychological safety explains part of that relationship. The outcome is therefore not simply feeling included, it is greater vigor, dedication, absorption to work, consistent with scholarly definition of engagement, according to Schofeli et al. 2002. Mechanism-based evidence may help organizations target safe participation more precisely than broad positivity programs, according to Neat et al. 2017. The next slide defines inclusive leadership as the independent variable. In this slide, inclusive leadership is the dependent variable in this proposal. Kameli et al. 2010 describe inclusive leadership through openness, accessibility, and availability. Openness means inviting questions, suggestions, and dissent. Accessibility means being approachable when employee needs support. Availability means making time for concerns and contributions. The broader literature also emphasizes belongingness and value uniqueness, meaning that employees are accepted as members of the group while their distinctive knowledge and identities are treated as assets, according to Kochmas et al. 2022. Inclusive leadership is the upstream in the model because leaders' behavior shape social conditions employees encounter before they decide whether speaking up is safe or whether deeper work investment is worthwhile. Nimbard and Edmondson 2006 demonstrated that leader inclusiveness can reduce status barrier, encourage lower status member to participate because this behavior can be observed, measured, and trained. Inclusive leadership is also an actionable intervention target. The proposed study will measure it with Kameli et al. 9-item inclusive leadership scale. Because inclusive leadership changes the perceived social risks of contribution, the next slide defines psychological safety. A brief background: psychological safety is the mediator. Edmondson 1999 defined it as a shared belief held by members of a team that the team is safe for interpersonal risk taking. You'll find that in page 354. In practical terms, it concerns whether employee can speak up, admit mistakes, ask questions, or propose ideas without expecting embarrassment, rejection, or punishment. Psychological safety is shaped by leader behavior and team interaction norms, and it has been associated with learning behavior, error reporting, communication, and team effectiveness, according to Grayley et al. 2021, Kim et al. 2020, Moon et al. 2023. It is equally important to state what psychological safety is not. It does not mean low standards, the absence of accountability, conflict avoidance, or endless argument. A team can be psychologically safe and still have demanding performance expectations. In this proposal, Psychological safety is not the dependent variable. It is the explanatory mechanism linking inclusive leadership to work engagement. The next slide defines work engagement, the dependent variable. That's slide 7. A brief background. Employee work engagement is the dependent variable, according to Shefeli et al. 2002, define engagement as a positive, fulfilling, work-related state of mind that is characterized by vigor, dedication, absorption. Page 74. Vigor refers to energy, resilience, effort, and persistence. Dedication reflects significance, enthusiasm, inspiration, pride, and challenge. Absorption refers to deep concentration and being happily engrossed in work. The construct is therefore broader than satisfaction or temporal enthusiasm. It reflects sustainable cognitive, emotional, and energetic investment in a work role. The proposed study will use the full 17-item Utrecht Work Engagement Scale, or you call it in short form US 17, to measure these 3 dimensions. For clarity, Shufeli et al. 2006 later validated the shorter US 9, but this proposal retains the full US 17 for continuity with the measurement plan. The theoretical bridge is that inclusive leadership reduces the social cost of contribution, while psychological safety enables employees to invest more energy and attention in their work, according to O'Donovan and McLeafy 2020. The next slide shows the empirical scope and organizational importance of the problem. Compelling statistics, the scope of the problem. The statistics demonstrate why this model matters. Gallup 2023 reported that only 23% of employees worldwide were actively engaged, while 59% were not engaged and 18% were actively disengaged. This means that most employees were not fully invested in their work. The upstream leadership conditions are also concerning. In an Egyptian hospital, for example, sample, according to Tai and Zorumba 2022, for example, reported that 67.25% of participants perceived poor inclusive leadership, while only 12.886% perceived good inclusive leadership. The model is supported by part evidence as well. Lee and Tang 2022 reported a standardized coefficient of beta which equals 0.45 from inclusive leadership to psychological safety. Psychological safety has also shown a substantive positive relationship with engagement. And Yusuf et al. 2022 reported a strong association between inclusive leadership and perceived quality of care. R equal 0.819. R stands for Pearson correlation coefficient. It measures the strength and direction of a linear relationship between 2 variables. These statistics do not prove causation, but they show that engagement, inclusion, and safety carry measurable organizational consequences. These statistical findings lead directly to the problem statement from the literature in the next slide. The problem statement now. The core problem is that inclusive leadership is widely associated with positive outcomes. Yet the process through which it produces employee work engagement remains insufficiently specified. Psychological safety is a plausible mediator, but much of the evidence relies on non-longitudinal surveys, limiting conclusion about temporal ordering. according to SIA 2023 and Vaquera et al. 2023. The problem has three practical dimensions. First, organizations need leadership development practices that translate inclusive behavior into daily management. Fu et al. 2022 specifically recommended managerial training centered on inclusiveness. Second, employee may self-censor or completely disengage when leader behavior makes contribution feel risky. Hospitality research link inclusive leadership with safety and constructive employee behavior, according to Qatar et al. 2022. Third, low safety environment may affect organizational outcomes, extending beyond morale, including care quality and error reporting, according to USAF et al. 2022. The research gap is therefore the need to estimate the specific indirect effect of inclusive leadership on work engagement through psychological safety in organizational work teams using a design that improves temporal separation. The next slide summarizes the empirical study that support the proposed model. Evidence-based, what exactly the literature shows. 4 studies illustrate the evidence base. First, Carmel et al. 2010, to start with, established a foundational pathway by showing what inclusive leadership supported employee involvement in creative work through psychological safety. Second, SIA 2023 provided direct evidence that psychological safety mediated the relationship between inclusive leadership and work engagement in leader-subordinate yards. Third, Vaquera et al. 2023 reported the same general mediation structure in the hospitality industry, strengthening contextual convergence. And finally, Bao et al. 2022 adds an important qualification: person job fit, also partially mediated the relationship between inclusive leadership and work engagement. That finding suggests that psychological safety may be a central mechanism without being the only mechanism. The proposed study, therefore, does not claim exclusivity. Instead, it tests psychological safety as the focal mediator while recognizing that trust, fit, commitment, and other processes may also operate. The contribution is a focus model in which the instrument hypothesis, effect size, absorption, and mediation analysis are aligned. Because the evidence is promising but incomplete, I will now identify the methodological gaps. Gaps in the literature, methodological speaking. The literature contains 4 major methodological gaps. First, many studies use cross-sectional design, which measure inclusive leadership, psychological safety, and engagement at one time. Cross-sectional mediation can produce biased estimates because it does not establish temporal order, according to Maxwell and Co. 2007. Second, many study relies on the same employee to report all 3 variables during the same survey session, increasing the risk of common method bias. Third, findings often come from one country or one sector, which limits generalizability across organizational contexts. Fourth, work engagement intervention have produced positive but generally modest effect, suggesting that more precise leadership mechanism needs stronger tests, according to Nate et al. 2017. The proposed response is a 3-wave time-lagged survey: inclusive leadership at time 1, abbreviated as T1, psychological safety at time 2, abbreviated as T2, and work engagement at time 3, abbreviated as T3. This design improves temporal separation while remaining explicitly non-experimental. The next slide addresses the conceptual gaps that accompany this design limitation. The conceptual gap concerns construct definition, mechanism, level of analysis, and boundary conditions. Inclusive leadership has been defined in different ways across studies. So, this proposal uses the Cameli behavior lineage for measurement while recognizing the broader belongingness and uniqueness literature according to Kochmas et al. 2022. Psychological safety, trust, personal job fit, and other mediators are often tested separately, leaving uncertainty about their comparative explanatory value, according to Bao et al. 2022, Wang et al. 2021, Wu and Li 2023. Psychological safety also creates a level of analysis issue. It may be treated as an individual perception or aggregated as a team claiming. But those approaches require different statistical justification, according to Edmondson 1999, Lebrantin, and Center 2008. Finally, culture, sector, team diversity, and work arrangement may change the strength of the pathway. The current study responds by naming psychological safety as the mediator, using validated instruments, conducting the primary analysis at the individual level, and retaining a team level extension only when aggregation is defensible. With gaps established now, the next slide states the research question. In this slide, the research question is, to what extent does passive inclusive leadership predict employee work engagement? And is this relationship mediated by psychological safety? This question contains 4 linked component parts. The direct part asks whether inclusive leadership predicts work engagement after psychological safety is considered. Part A asks whether inclusive leadership predicts psychological safety. Part B asks whether psychological safety predicts work engagement after inclusive leadership is included in the model. The indirect effect asks how much of the inclusive leadership to work engagement relationship is carried through psychological safety. This structure is important because it prevents the proposal from treating mediation as a general idea. Each component of the question corresponds to a specific coefficient and hypothesis. The question is grounded in converging evidence from inclusive leadership and engagement study, while the proposed design addresses limitation in timing and measurement alignment, according to Aslan et al. 2021, Bao et al. 2022, Sia 2023, and Vakira et al. 2023. The next slide translates the research question into 4 testable hypotheses. 4 testable hypotheses map directly into mediation model. Hypothesis 1 states that inclusive leadership will positively predict employee work engagement. Hypothesis 2 states that inclusive leadership will positively predict psychological safety. This is part A. Hypothesis 3 states that psychological safety will positively predict work engagement after inclusive leadership is statistically considered. This is part B. Hypothesis 4 states that psychological safety will partially mediate the relationship between inclusive leadership and work engagement. Partial mediation is specified because the prior literature suggests that a residual direct relationship may remain after psychological safety enters the model, and because other mechanisms may also contribute, according to Bao et al. 2022, Sia 2023, IA's 2022 mediation framework will be used to estimate the direct effect, the two component parts, and the bootstrapped indirect effect. The important part is that every hypothesis has a corresponding statistical test rather than functioning as a broad narrative prediction. The next slide, which is slide 15, explains why inclusive leadership is the appropriate independent variable. Inclusive leadership is positioned as the upstream independent variable for theoretical and practical reasons. Theoretically, leader behavior occurs before employees form judgments about whether their team is safe for interpersonal risk taking and before they decide how much energy to invest in their work. Inclusive leader also influence access to voice, feedback, participation, information, and support. When leaders are open, accessible, and available, employee contribution should feel more valued and less risky, which may increase psychological safety and engagement. According to Kameli et al. 2010 and Nimbard and Edmondson 2006, practically, inclusive leadership is actionable. Its behavior can be assessed, trained, coached, and evaluated over time, making it a useful entry point for organizational intervention. According to Kochmas et al. 2022, O'Donovan and Mark Alufey 2020, psychological safety is therefore the proximal climate mechanism, and work engagement is the employee outcome. This causal ordering gives the model both conceptual clarity and practical evidence. Because work engagement is the outcome, the next slide develops the dependent variable through the 4 Ds. 4 Ds of the dependent variable. D1 define work engagement. So the first D is definition. Work engagement is defined from the scholarly literature, not from everyday language or dictionary. Schofeli et al. 2002 describe it as a positive, fulfilling, work-related state of mind that is characterized by vigor, dedication, and absorption. Page 74 of the article. Vigor includes energy, resilience, effort, and persistence. Dedication includes significance, enthusiasm, inspiration, pride, and challenge. Absorption includes full concentration and deep engrossment in work. Engagement is therefore a relatively persistent, affective cognitive condition rather than a brief mood. In this proposal, the 3 dimensions will be measured with the full US 17. The later cross-national study of Schofeli et al. 2006 show that the original 17-item instrument could be shortened to the US 9, meaning 9 items. However, the current measurement plan retains the full version, which is US 17, for this purpose of this study, or this proposal rather. The definition, dimensions, and instrument are therefore aligned across the introduction and method. After defining the dependent variable, the next slide describes how it appears in the study context. The 2 describe work engagement in context. The second D is description in context. Work engagement will be examined among full-time employees who report to an identifiable supervisor and participate in an intact organizational team. This criteria ensures that inclusive leadership and psychological safety are meaningful social conditions for each participant. Engagement will appear as sustained effort, resilience during difficulty, a sense of meaning, and pride in work role, focused attention, and active participation. Employee will report these experiences through were 17 dimensions of vigor, dedication, and absorption. The model predicts that work engagement should be higher when leader behavior and team climate make contribution feel safer. The outcome matters because engagement connects leadership condition to performance, citizenship behavior, innovation, and employee well-being, according to Shen et al. 2020, Nate et al. 2017, and Kwansim et al. 2022. Operationally speaking, higher US 17 scores will indicate stronger employee work engagement. Psychological safety remains the mediator, not a second outcome. The next slide states the expected direction and degree change. The third D is direction, while the fourth is degree. The expected direction is positive across the model. Higher inclusive leadership should predict higher psychological safety, and higher psychological safety should predict higher work engagement. The proposed degree estimates are deliberately cautious. The direct inclusive leadership to engagement part is expected to fall approximately between beta 0.12 and 0.22. Inclusive leadership to psychological safety part is expected to be moderate, approximately beta 0.30 to 0.45. The psychological safety to work engagement part is expected to be approximately beta 0.40 to 0.45. The indirect effect is expected to be positive, approximately 0.13 to 0.20. These ranges are calibrated from converging studies rather than one preferred estimate. CR 2023 reported beta 0.121 for the direct part, which is the inclusive leadership to work engagement, and beta 0.446 for psychological safety to engagement. Bao et al. 2022 reported beta 0.220 for the inclusive leadership to work engagement relationship, while Lee and Tang 2022 reported beta 0.45 for inclusive leadership to psychological safety. These values guide power planning. They are not promised results. The next slide clarifies the mediator's role, which is psychological safety now, and the condition for a possible team level analysis. Psychological safety. The mediator profile psychological safety. Psychological safety is the mediator that explains how inclusive leadership may become work engagement. It is not a dependent variable. It will be measured with Edmondson 1999 7-item team psychological safety scale. The primary analysis will treat psychological safety as an individual employee perception. However, because the construct is theoretically framed as a shared team belief, a team level extension may be considered if enough employees are nested within identifiable teams. Aggregation will not be automatic. Within team, agreement will first be examined using RWG of J with 0.70. RWG of J, is the statistical index of within group agreement for a scale containing J items, or higher, serving as an initial benchmark. ICC1 would assess, according to Lebrontin and Center 2008, will assess how much variance, difference in attributable to team membership, and ICC2 will assess the reliability team average or team means. The expected mediator pattern is that inclusive leadership reduces perceived interpersonal risk. Psychological safety predicts greater vigor, dedication, and absorption, and the residual direct path from leadership to engagement becomes smaller but remain positive. supporting partial mediation according to SIA 2023. Before moving into the method section, the next slide integrates the topic with a biblical worldview. The biblical integration is based on principles rather than an assumption that scripture uses modern IO psychology terminology. Genesis 1:26-27 establishes the fact that every person bears the image of God. Inclusive leadership is consistent with honoring that dignity. James 1:19 calls believers to be quick to listen, a disposition consistent with leader openness and accessibility. 1 Corinthians 12:14-18 emphasizes that different members have necessary functions, supporting the value of distinct contribution rather than uniformity. Philippians 2:3-4 calls leaders to consider the interests of others, which aligns with service-oriented use of authority. In addition to this slide, Colossians 3:23 states, using NIV New International Version Bible 2011, states that whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, as working for the Lord, not for human masters. This emphasizes wholehearted work, which parallel the energetic and meaningful investment described by work engagement. Together, these passages support a world view in which leaders honor dignity, listen carefully, value different gifts, serving others, cultivate conditions in which people can contribute fully. The introduction is now complete. The next slide shows how the literature-based argument becomes a method. The introduction established the practical problem. The three constructs, the evidence base, the gaps, the research question, the hypothesis, and the expected effect size ranges. The method now convert that argument into a measurement and analysis plan. The continuity check is intentional. The population remains full-time employee in organizational work team. The independent variable is measured with Cameli Ito inclusive leadership scale. The mediator is measured with Edmondson team psychological safety scale. The dependent variable is measured with the US 17. Hypothesis 1 through 4 remain aligned with the direct effect, part A, part B, and the indirect effect. Finally, the degree estimate from the introduction guide, the power rationale for the mediation model, according to Schoolman et al. 2017. The method is therefore not a separate argument, it is the operational version of the introduction. The next slide restates the study logic before the design details are introduced. Study logic and hypothesis. The method is organized around the same mediation model, inclusive leadership as time 1, psychological safety as time 2, and employee work engagement as time 3. Hypothesis 1 tests whether inclusive leadership predicts work engagement. Hypothesis 2 tests whether inclusive leadership predicts psychological safety. Hypothesis 3 tests whether psychological safety predicts work engagement after inclusive leadership is included. Hypothesis 4 tests whether the indirect effect through psychological safety is statistically different from 0. Prior research supports the expected positive direction of this part, but the proposed study improves design continuity by separating the predictor, mediator, and the outcome across time, according to Aslan et al. 2021, Bao et al. 2022, and SIA 2023. Partial mediation remains the planned pattern because the direct path may continue after psychological safety is considered. The statistical framework follows IES 2022, using path estimate and a bootstrap confidence interval for the indirect effect. Because mediation requires temporal logic, The next slide explains the design, participant, and sampling plan. The study uses a three-wave time lag non-experimental mediation design. Time 1 measures inclusive leadership. Time 2 measures psychological safety. Time 3 measures work engagement. The wave will be separated by approximately 3 weeks within the proposed 2 to 4 weeks window to reduce same occasion measurement effect and improve temporal ordering according to Doman and Griffin 2015, Maxwell and Co. 2007. The design remains non-experimental, so it supports prediction and temporal precedence rather than causal proof. The recruitment target is 400 employees, assuming 75% retention after 25% attrition. The arithmetic yields 300 analyzable cases, which means 400 multiplied by 0.75 equals 300. So participant must be full-time employee as a criteria, have worked with the same supervisor for at least 3 months, and belong to an intact work team. At time 1, screening will record team membership or team ID, supervisor code, team size, and team size. Recruitment will span professional, service, public, and non-profit organizations. So the final number N of 300 is planned around the indirect effect, the binding constraint in mediation power analysis, according to Schumann et al. 2017. Once the design and sample are defined, the next slide names the measures and control. Each measure matches the construct name in the introduction. At time 1, inclusive leadership will be measured with Cameli 2010, et al. 2010 9-item inclusive leadership scale, which focuses on openness, availability, and accessibility. At time 2, psychological safety will be measured with Edmondson 1999 7-item team psychological safety scale, which addresses voice, mistakes, and interpersonal risk. At time 3, work engagement will be measured with the US 17, covering vigor, dedication, and absorption, according to Sufeli et al. 2022. The plan covariates are age, gender, tenure with the supervisor, organizational sector, organizational size, and team size. This control will enter all regression equation and the process model 4 part. So the focal relationship are estimated after accounting for this contextual variable. Reliability will be evaluated before hypothesis testing with alpha of 0.70 or higher used as a maximum expectation. Time 1 team and supervisor code, team membership, and team size preserve the future team level option. The next slide explains how the 3-wave will be administered ethically and confidentially. Method, the procedure and ethical safeguard. The procedure has 4 stages. First, recruitment material will explain voluntary participation, confidentiality, the academic purpose of the study, and the 3-wave commitment. Second, at time 1, participants will complete the inclusive leadership measure and controls. They will also provide a self-generated anonymous matching code, team membership or team ID, supervisor code, and team size. These fields are essential for matching responses and preserving the possibility of a team level extension. Third, after the first 2 to 4 weeks lag, participants will complete the psychological safety scale. Fourth, after the second lag, they will complete the US 17. Ethical safeguards include informed consent, voluntary participation, de-identified codes, secure data handling, and group reporting. No identifiable result will be given to an individual employee, team, leader, or organization. Modest stage incentives or raffle entries may be used to reduce attrition, but the amount will be low enough to avoid undue influence. The study will proceed only after institutional review approval. So once the data are collected, the next slide explains the analysis plan. Analysis plan for hypothesis testing. The analysis begins with screening for missingness, outliers, distributional problem, response pattern concern, and magical consistency. Reliability coefficient, descriptive statistic, and correlation will then be computed for inclusive leadership, psychological safety, and work engagement. The primary mediation test will use SPSS process model 4 or an equivalent regression or structural equation model. Age, gender, tenure with supervisor, sector, organizational size, and team size will be entered as covariates in all relevant part equations. 5,000 bootstraps resamples will be used to construct 95% confidential interval for the indirect effect A times B following current mediation guidance according to IS 2022, where defensible, missing data will be addressed through full information maximum likelihood, abbreviated as FIML, or multiple imputation, and complete case result will be reported as a sensitivity check. Reporting will include standardized data, standard error SE, confidential interval, p-value, r-squared change, or r squared, change in r squared, and the indirect effect. Hypothesis 4 is supported when the bootstrap confidential interval for A times B does not include 0. The next slide connects the expected pattern to the sample size rationale reporting language. Expected pattern and power bridge. The expected pattern is positive but intentionally cautious. Part A, from inclusive leadership to psychological safety, is planned at approximately beta 0.45, consistent with Lee and Tan 2022. Part B, from psychological safety to work engagement, is planned at approximately beta 0.446, consistent with CR 2023. The residual direct part, which is the C part, is expected to fall roughly between beta 1.2 and 3.0 because prior estimates vary. The indirect effect is expected to fall approximately between 0.13 and 0.20. Bao et al. 2022 and CR 2023 provides important caution against adopting only the largest published coefficient. The final analyzable target of 300 is therefore treated as a minimum for the indirect effect under conservative assumption. According to Skuma et al. 2017, partial mediation is expected, but the study will report what the data show. The defense language will remain precise. Inclusive leadership may predict or be associated with engagement, and psychological safety may account for part of the relationship. The study will not claim that a non-experimental design proves causation. The analysis plan requires a realistic project schedule, which is presented next. The project schedule overview. The project is planned approximately 26 weeks. Week 1 through 8 are devoted to institutional review, instrument finalization, consent material, inclusion criteria, incentive, and recruitment preparation. Week 6 through 12 include recruitment and time 1 data collection, with preparation overlapping the review period, but data collection beginning only after approval. Week 10 through 16 cover time 2 psychological safety survey after the first lag. Week 14 through 20 covers time 3 work engagement survey after the second lag. Week 20 through 23 are reserved for code matching, attrition review, data cleaning, reliability analysis, and mediation modeling. Week 24 through 26 are used for tables, interpretation, limitations, and the final report. This 5 to 6 month footprint reflects the seriousness of a three-wave design and protect the proposal temporal separation according to Doman and Griffin 2015 and Maxwell and Co 2007. The next slide provides the same schedule in a more detailed phase-by-phase format. The detailed schedule clarifies work within each phase. During week 1 through 8, the study will analyze item wording, scoring, consent language, eligibility screening, incentive, recruitment material, and the review application. Week 6 through 12, recruitment will target approximately 400 employees. Time 1 will collect inclusive leadership, demographics, covariates, team membership or team ID, supervisor code, team size, and the anonymous matching code. During week 10 to 16, rolling cohorts will complete the psychological safety measure after the first lag. During week 14 to 20, participants will complete US 17 after the second lag. Week 20 to 21 will focus on matching, attrition pattern, missing data, scale reliability. Week 22 to 23 will include covariates, adjusted regression, process model 4, and the bootstrapped indirect effect. Week 26 to 26 will focus on interpretation and reporting. Even a careful schedule cannot eliminate every validity threat, so the next slide states the limitation. The limitations which are threats to the interpretation. The proposed design improves rigor but retains 6 important limitations. First, the study is non-experimental. Temporal separation improves ordering but does not establish causality, according to Maxwell and Co. 2007. Second, employee report all 3 focal variables, so common method variance may remain even when measures are separated across time. Third, a cross-sector convenience sample may not represent every industry, culture, or job type, according to Kokmas et al. 2022. Fourth, team-level psychological safety requires enough complete teams, adequate within team agreement, meaningful between team variance, and reliable team means, according to Edmondson 1999, Lebrontin and Center 2008. Fifth, psychological safety is not the only possible mechanism. Trust, person job fit, the commitment may explain additional variance. Bao et al. 2022, 6 attrition may reduce power and bias the matched sample if those who leave differ systematically from those who complete all waves. Reverse or reciprocal relationship also remain possible because each construct is measured once. The next slide converts this limitation into concrete next step. The first next step is to finalize instrument, item wording, scoring rules, reliability, target, followed by a small pilot when visible. The second is to strengthen future design with supervisor rating, behavioral indicator, or objective outcomes to reduce single source dependence. The third is to pursue the team level extension option, testing psychological safety aggregation only if time 1 team membership data records support it and the aggregation evidence is adequate. The procedural dependency is why team ID and team size must be collected during recruitment. The fourth is to compare competing mechanisms such as trust, person job fit, or affective commitment in future model according to Bao et al. 2022. The fifth is to translate findings into leadership development content focused on openness, accessibility and availability, voice and safe participation. The applied contribution is not simply to state that inclusive leadership matters, but to estimate how much of its relationship with work engagement operates through psychological safety and identify where the intervention might be most effective, according to Neat et al. 2017, O'Donovan and Mark Alife 2020. The next slide closes the proposal by restating its unified unified contribution. In conclusion, the proposal contributes a focused model, a stronger temporal design, and a reconciled measurement plan. The model contains one independent variable, which is inclusive leadership, one mediator, which is psychological safety, and one dependent variable, which is the employee work engagement. The three-wave design improves temporal ordering and reduces same occasion measurement effect compared with a cross-sectional survey, while the interpretation remains appropriately non-causal, according to Doman and Griffith 2015 and Maxwell and Co. 2007. The instrument plan is consistent across sections. The Kamali Inclusive Leadership Scale, Edmontis' team Psychological Safety Scale, and Shafulis' team US 17. The effect size assumptions are calibrated across multiple studies rather than anchor on one unusually large result, and the sample size rationale focuses on the indirect effect, according to Schoolman et al. 2017. Finally, the biblical integration connects dignity, listening, distinct contribution, service, wholehearted work with the ethical implication of the model. In overall, the study asks not only whether inclusive leadership relates to work engagement, but how psychological safety may carry that relationship through. The remaining slide provide the full APA 7th edition reference list. That will be slide 33 through 36. Slide 33 through 36. The final slide, which is slide 36, complete the APA reference list, including the foundational engagement, measure, mediation, power guidance, and so on and so forth. This concludes the proposal. Thank you for your time and attention. I welcome your questions regarding the theoretical model, measurement decisions, power assumption, and proposed analysis.